We spent our 20s and 30s following the path we were told to follow. Hustle hard, climb fast, prove yourself. College, certifications, titles, and the success and stability will follow. And then life happened. For some, it was kids, others, COVID, a layoff, or just a shift in everything we thought defined us. Samantha Swan and I have watched each other's journeys for the last 10 years. And for this episode, we sat down and talked about what comes after you realize the rules just don't quite fit anymore. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Motivation and That. I'm Natalie, your host, and this is where we take hot mess to high potential. Today's episode has been a little while in the making, but that is how some of the best ones end up being, especially when they're with someone that you've known for a really long period of time. And Samantha and I go back to the beginning of our healthcare careers, I think, when we first were introduced through a set of professional organizations. We'll chat about that in a minute, but I want to make sure that people know who my guest is, and it is Samantha Swan. You'll hear me say Sam because we've known each other for so long. And Sam is the senior manager in strategic planning in the healthcare world. We're going to try to not use too much acronyms or things as we go because today's conversation isn't necessarily about healthcare. Today, it's about us as people and our generation and doing all of these things like trying to actually balance and live life with families and kids and careers and all of that goodness. So, Sam, without further ado, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners a little bit. Who are you? What is important to know about you as we kind of launch into today's chat?
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie, for having me here today. I guess I'll start. I've worked in the healthcare industry for over a decade at this point. I definitely had more of a zigzag career working in different sectors of healthcare. So, in the short amount of time that I've been in healthcare, I feel like I've had so many different experiences straight out of grad school, which I think is when we initially met, Natalie. And I spent my 20s really working myself up the career ladder, putting myself out there and really growing my breadth and depth of experience when it came to healthcare. And I'm really proud of that journey that I've been on. But as I entered my 30s and started to, I got married, settled down in the suburbs outside of the city. My shift really changed the moment I decided that like we were ready to expand our family. Also, just going through that whole period of COVID, of isolation, and really being able to sit with your thoughts that really shifted our perspective on just like what's really important in life. And that shift really became a reality when we first had our first child at the tail end of COVID. I had a son in 2022. And then I also welcomed our daughter in the end of 2024. So right now I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So there really was a really big shift on how I prioritize my time, but also not losing that sense of who I am as a person, what are my career ambitions, and how that's been received in the workforce, especially in the healthcare industry, has been quite a journey in itself. I definitely had some really high highs with the village that I've created for myself, both at work as well as in my personal life. And at some points, it was also a challenge to figure out where do I fit in this world now that my focus is not just like growing my career and growing my professional experiences. So, yeah, and I know this is something that has been a common theme in conversations that I've had with a lot of my peers and my friends who are in a similar stage of life, of just like, how do you figure out how to do it all? Can you do it all? And what does that mean for where you go next in your career and just life in general?
Yeah, and it's such a topic that no one has strong answers to, right? And the longer that folks like you and I are finding ourselves in this position, I feel like the more, I hate to say tangible, like the discussion's getting, but it's like, all right, we're done talking. We actually want to do something about what this means. And, you mentioned we met right at it when you were getting out of grad school. I was not that much further in front. through a professional organization for healthcare leaders. And Sam and I both ended up actually as presidents of that local chapter. So we ran a board. We were there, and I drug Sam kicking and screaming, I think, partly way through that. But I mean, those were late night meetings. You were sitting on committees, you were putting events on, plus you were working your job, plus you were having relationships, plus we're buying houses, we're doing all these things. And we were raised to really think, okay, well, this is success. You go to school, you go to grad school if you really want to go the next step, you get the good job, you invest in the education and the networks that you're in. And then I think we all turned about, anywhere from 32 to 37, and we went, is this burnout? Like burning the candle so hard at both ends. And I don't have kids. So, I mean, then you add that layer in. So tell me, like, the first kind of feeling where you were in that moment of, hey, we've been kind of told from the start, here's what you should do, here's the path you should follow. When did you realize your goals, or maybe like this might not be all it was cracked up to be when they pitched it to me?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I feel like school and your education and the just the culture of being in a college or university and graduate programs, you're trained to think like you follow this direct path. This is what you do. You're what's the term? First in, last out in the office, and it's just like you work hard, you see the results, and that's what you're supposed to do to really grind and move up and be successful in your career. No one prepares you for when you have these other things outside of your life of work. And how do you figure out how are you supposed to do it all? Can you do it all? And how do you break some of that old school mentality of like, I mean, I hate to say it sometimes, like women in the workforce who are sometimes expected to seem like taking a step back the second you have kids. And that's not how it is nowadays. There's a lot of women who want to work. I think that it really hit me probably about 6 months in after having my son. So I took 12 weeks of maternity leave at that point and returned back to work a little after 3 months. And after 3 months of being back in the workforce, trying to do it all, balancing childcare, figuring out how to function on 3 hours of broken sleep every night, I just sort of like broke and was like, this is not sustainable. I need to figure out how to prioritize and better optimize how I'm living my day-to-day life, which is really ironic because that's what I do in my role as a strategic planner is figuring out what is our team's priorities, what do we have the bandwidth and capacity to do, and how do we then optimize what we're doing with the limited number of resources and hours in the day that we have. It was almost like taking that model and like looking at myself and thinking like, how do I do that in my personal life too? And learning how to say no and setting those boundaries, I think are really important. But also, I think it was also important to let people know on your team, especially your leaders, of like, hey, this is where I'm at in life, but that doesn't change my ambitions. It's just I'm better prioritizing where I direct my ambitions to still meet those overall goals. Um, it definitely is an evolution, and there's a lot of moving factors of like who are the people that on your team, who are your supporters, and who do you really need to convince or really get to see your perspective of like just because your roles outside of work have changed, that's not the change of your perspective of like how you approach your job or your career. So, and it changes so day to day as like the kids change every day too, and your needs evolve as they get older. And if you introduce another one, it's sort of like stepping back to square one, but now you have two of them and try to balancing all of that at the same time.
Yeah, and you mentioned, all of this then coinciding for you during COVID on top of it, which ironically was showing us just how different we could all work in some nature and
Mhm.
still be successful, or maybe even in different ways successful, like what's defining what success is for us now. And I think, that we're now in that state of everyone's trying to go back to pre-COVID life in a way, right? And there's a whole group of us kicking and screaming going, so why do we need to do that? Like, we showed you that work can be done sporadically throughout a day. We showed you we can work remotely, pick our kid up when they're sick from school, get them somewhere stable, and come back to work and still be focused. And
Mhm.
so all of these old hard and fast rules before there was innovation in our
Mhm.
spaces feel like folks can't let them go. What were
Mhm.
some of the things that you were just like, well, it made sense that we kind of functioned in that path and it felt hard to go back to that lifestyle? You mentioned kind of after the 3 months in and going, oh, like, what is happening? What were the things that just didn't make sense anymore for you?
Yeah, I think the things that didn't make sense to me, and I'm really fortunate to work in companies that also had the same understanding, was that you have to have your butt in a seat from 9 until 5 every single day. And there's no like taking breaks to go multitask and pick up your kid, or like that was, I feel like that was the culture before COVID. And I don't know if that is really transpired in a lot of different companies now that you're expected to be totally available from these particular hours of the day. I think there are still some organizations and teams in general that COVID allowed them to see that like you can have flexibility and your team is willing to flex around like certain needs, whether you have to go pick up your kid or you are, but then you're making up those hours somewhere else within the day or logging on early for a level of understanding that most roles like you may not be able to get the like be able to like be in your chair from 11:30 to 12 because you have to run your kid to an appointment, but there's like a level of trust and understanding like this will get done by X amount of deadline and that person will make it done, make it happen no matter what. And that's how they adjust and flex their lifestyle in order to fit that particular deadline. I think COVID has really allowed a lot of leaders to have more of that flexibility when they build that trust with their teams. But I think it does vary based on the leader and the team that you're supporting in. I think I do have to give a lot of credit to all those parents out there that had kids during COVID, were pregnant in the time when where you're in the office 5 days a week. Because I don't know how I had both pregnancies at home in my sweatpants the entire time. And I don't know how all the women had managed to go in the office 5 days a week and go through this whole postpartum period in the office. So I think that has been such a positive shift because a lot of places have seen the value of having that level of flexibility. And there's a lot of more organizations that are coming around to that. This return back to office mentality, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that may move the needle back the other way. I'm really fortunate to be in a role that is fully remote and having that level of flexibility. But I think there's a lot of benefits to having that in-person connection because motherhood could also be very isolating. So those roles that are being forced in person to some extent, I think there's also some added benefits to merge with the level of flexibility that I.
Yeah, and this is always part of a really controversial conversation, right? Which is, okay, well, men don't take maternity leave. And so they're more, they'll be in the office 12 months at a time other than vacation. And you don't have to plan around a maternity leave. Now, granted, so much of that is changing. Paternity leave becoming more consistent. Mom takes 3 months, dad takes 3 months, something along those lines. But there's also a point of it's not really cost effective for most people to have one income in the household and have one of the parents stay home consistently.
Mhm.
And so you have all these budgeting decisions, and I haven't had to make them since we made the decision not to have kiddos, but it's that dual pressure of I want to have kids, I want to have this family. We can't do it on one income. So we have to have two incomes. It'd be great to be recognized for the skill and talent I bring to the table, which might be a leader, but then the leader might have more critique or push to get back into the office more quickly
Mhm.
after something like that. Like, oh no, you can't, don't take that extra, vacation time you've saved up. So what were some of the things that you and, your partner, your husband talked about when you were making decision one and decision two, and some of the trade-offs that you actually found yourself facing
Mhm.
that not everyone may understand?
Yeah. So it was always in the cards for me that I wanted to continue to work, not only because it was a means to an end, because we needed the dual incomes to support the lifestyle that we've sustained, but it was also something that, like, you know what, I spent so many years in schools and building my career earlier in my life that it's something that's like my pride and joy and gives me that sense of accomplishment that I want to continue to grow and foster and also set the example for my children as well that like, mom and dad can both work and mom can be just as successful or even more successful than dad in some environments, like just having that level of equality. I think where the challenges came when I did decide to work was the response of people when I came back. Like I mentioned, I have leaders that were super supportive and like a very accommodating of the level of flexibility that I had requested in order to do all of the mom parenting things while also working. But I also had I also felt at times that I was um, being passed up for opportunities, or even though I presented myself as being available and wanting to take on the challenges at work, they weren't given to me, or I wasn't. My name was never on the short list to be considered because they thought, oh, I don't have the bandwidth to handle that based on my personal life. And I think that is such a misconception in the workplace because if anything, I think parents and moms in particular are coming out to be the more stronger leaders based on their life experiences because they've learned how to prioritize things. They have learned to figure out the best way to juggle different opportunities at the same time. They have those soft skills of reasoning with a toddler, reasoning in front of a boardroom. They're very similar communication styles and strategies that you have to use in order to instill that power and influence both in the boardroom as well as at home as a parent. So, in a way, I feel like a lot of leaders are missing out by passing on working moms or working parents because they assume that we can't handle the additional work. And I think that is something that is still a cultural shift just because someone is a working parent and is not available at 5 p.m. to meet, but can still do the work is definitely a miss in some places.
Yeah, it
Yes.
makes me wonder if hiring managers, and you and I have both been in that seat, right? So I can think back if we walked into a scenario and we just said, let's assume everyone's going to have to take an equal amount of a month off a year, right? Between vacation, sick time, caregiver time, whatever that might be, taking care of your pet. That's what I end up having to take, time off for. If we didn't apply the tag for why they might need time or flexibility and just said, let's assume everyone might need this, you probably have folks that now are part of your considerations that you were
Mhm.
unconsciously, you know, not
Mhm.
allowing to get in the mix. And I know, there were a couple times where I'd interview someone, they'd be pregnant, and it wasn't a bias moment, but I was like, all right, if they're selected, I have to figure out how to work around maternity leave. And
Mhm.
HR would be like, don't ever say that. Don't say it.
Mhm.
So there's like a practicality fact of the matter, but that's the whole point of being a leader, right? Like,
Oh,
how often do you have to be agile for a lot of other situations that have
oh,
nothing to do with parenting?
absolutely, yes. And I think this is also where you're starting to see a shift. Like, there's no award for how many PTO days you didn't use every year. So and more often I am seeing my leaders saying like, use your PTO days, like be fully engaged in your personal time outside of life. And I'm glad that they're saying that because it almost levels the playing field for the parents who do have to log off at 5 p.m. and are not responding to emails to their bosses at 8 o'clock at night. And it's encouraging people to like actually take the mental time off on weekends and evenings instead of grinding and working hard. Like there shouldn't be that incentive to work harder on times where you are not supposed to be working. And that culture of having work-life balance whether or not you have kids, I think is something that is really important in preventing that burnout that we're now seeing in a lot of people our age when we were grinding 40, 50, 60 hours a week and to get to where you needed to go. But now you're seeing a shift of like, you don't have to put in those 80-hour work weeks. Granted, I know there are some jobs specifically that are focused that require that time commitment. But I think that also makes those who are having different life situations, whether you are a caregiver to a parent or caregiver to a child or a pet, that it's okay to take that time and it's okay to figure out a balance that works for you and not feel like you are taking a step back in your career or missing out on opportunities at work.
And a lot of this conversation, folks will probably notice is spinning around the idea of you want to have it all, right? You want to be top of your game. You want to be best parent. You want to be best friend, best spouse, best kid, best everything that there might be. And we've been coached to that. We've got social media in our face, basically saying, like, look, this person, somehow has topped the scale of everything, and I should be able to do the same thing. But, there are elements that I think because we have that pressure when we have a shift in life, just like the one you went through, there's a question of what won't I be anymore? It's like leaving a past version of yourself behind and a little grief probably for that. But
Mhm.
what are, as you've lived it and you've done one of those shifts and we both left careers, or jobs, employers and shifted somewhere else and it's happening more and more. How do we combat the fear element with that of
Mhm.
going, yes, I want to have this change. I want to do this thing. It may mean I don't have a storybook picture for a few months or a year or whatever that might be. How do we get comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think the concept of you can have you that you can have it all. I think you can have it all, but not necessarily all at one time. So I think there's different eras and phases within your career where you and killing it in one area, and then you're letting some areas take a little bit of step back so that you can thrive in one area, whether that's parenthood or your career or achieving your bucket list dreams of going and travel the world or whatever. And I think there's just an era that exists for certain moments in your life. But when you look at the bigger picture, hopefully when we're older and we could take a step back, like you will probably see that you did have it all. It just happened in different eras. And there was always this analogy that I've heard, and I've always told this to my fellow parent friends at work and in personal life, is that in parenthood, and other roles too, we're constantly juggling many balls in the air. Um, some of your balls are glass, and some of your balls are plastic. And in different times, you have to figure out which are your balls or which are your priorities or glass that you just cannot drop or are non-negotiables, and which are those balls that are plastic that if you were to drop it in one time or in one week just because you had too many things going on, like that will bounce back and you can pick it up and start it all over again. So it's really just identifying which of the balls that you're juggling this week are glass and do you really need to put extra emphasis on, and which ones that are, it's like, you know what, it's okay if you're just letting that go from now. And I think that just really exemplifies, like, even though something happens at a certain time that is beyond your control, that changes your certain circumstances, whether that's having a baby, time is always temporary, and there's always going to be future opportunities for you to go after your dream. Like, it's never too late to go after certain goals in your life. It just figuring out the timing is like always the challenge, but always doable at certain points. Even though I think sometimes it's hard when you're in the moment where you think you just cannot do it. Everything's temporary, and everything tends to work itself out at times. I think that's as a very strong type A, sometimes that's hard to step back and think about.
It sure is. It's a beautiful premise of sure, have it all, just maybe not, overwhelmed at once. I think of eating too much chocolate, right? You come home from Halloween, you've got all the candy. You don't have to eat it all at once. It's all there. And, but we've also been faced with, and this wasn't kind of on our prep thing, but it's something that hit us both around the same time all this other stuff is happening, where we lost a colleague very early in her career. And, I know it impacted both of us in a lot of ways, and so there's this element of life is short, which I think may put pressure on if there's something that you really want to do and really means something to you, to not wait until everything feels perfect for it, because
Mhm.
it's never really going to be perfect for it. And that,
Mhm.
sense of control may never really hit you. When you, decided, hey, the time is right to expand the family and do some of those things, were there things that were like, well, it's not the perfect time, but COVID happening right in the middle of it. Yeah. How do you work through that feeling of, well, now is the right time and
Mhm.
we shouldn't keep waiting?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and this is probably my strategic planning hat, is like, how do you build out that roadmap? Like, what are the milestones that you'd like to hit so that you can like have something tangible to work towards? But then when you sort of take off that like my very strong type A hat is like, how do you prepare for the unexpected? And but how does your timeline adjust when the unexpected hit? And like I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about this, but there was a time after I had my first child that, and we were thinking about how to eliminate it at my current company, and that really shifted a lot of priorities for me of like, what am I supposed to do now? Like, this was like something that was so integral in my day-to-day life. It almost was my identity at that time, my career, and now it was taken away from me. How does that shift like tactically, how are we supposed to make it through? How am I supposed to find a new job? What does that mean to our timelines? So you have to figure out like where do you build in that level of flexibility for the unexpected moments and being okay with change and pivoting whenever you need to pivot. But then also not losing sight of like what is your ultimate goal because yeah, you only have one life to live and these are the things that you want to accomplish. And there's only a certain amount of time that you have in this lifespan to accomplish what you want. So again, it comes to balance of figuring out what's really important, but then being okay to ebb and flow where needed, but still keeping that end goal in mind.
And you point out something really critical, right? As much as we plan, there is the unexpected that hits us out of nowhere, and you can't anticipate it all the time. Sure, can you have this exhaustive list of this could happen?
Mhm.
100%, but then you're just bogged down by that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You've touched on your role strategic planning background. I've got the risk background. So it is going to be the one time I want to touch on healthcare because healthcare is the lovely industry, like many other service functions, that never sleeps. The hospitals are
Mhm.
running 24/7. Even insurance is still kind of getting a backlog overnight from ED sending things in, an industry. And
Mhm.
yet it is staffed and run by humans who can't always be on. And so if we were to look at ways to deal with an industry that's facing massive burnout and applying a strategic lens to it, or a risk conversation, what are ways that we can recognize our current environment and maybe take some tips from other places, right? And at least think a little bit differently about
Mhm.
supporting this generation of workers coming in and trying to fill, positions that have been held for a really long time. What do we need to consider through this as we think about where we're at in life?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a very big cultural change, and I think we're starting to see that when you have more people of our generation succeeding into those higher leadership roles. I think that there is definitely a more of an emphasis of having that work-life balance. And quite honestly, I think that is a selling factor for some companies when they're trying to attract new candidates. Is like we can be and expect excellence and perfection in what we're executing, both from a healthcare perspective. I mean, healthcare, I work in more of that healthcare innovation space, and both of those industries never sleep because everyone's always trying to develop the next new thing, get it out the door. But I think when it comes to attracting new candidates, I think a lot of the generations looking for like how those organizations that promote those work-life balances, but also promoting the opportunity to excel and exceed within their organizations. And I think that's making leaders really shift their priorities of how do we build in time for our team members to not be sitting in meetings and not be grinding out PowerPoints and building out business models this from when they first log into them, they first log off, or do they ever log off? I've seen some glimmers of hope when it comes to like how we're building in like Focus Fridays, where you have dedicated time just to think and create and develop new ways to do things within your particular workspace. I think also it's in just from like one-on-one conversations or team conversations, talking about mental health, making that more of a norm to discuss or bring to the table like, hey, it's okay to not be okay. And here are some resources that are available if you feel like you need to talk to someone, or leaders being more open to talk about, or just being a listening ear to their team members of talking about whether it's like a personal issue or figuring it out. Like, I feel like a long time ago, it was like you don't at work you say XYZ, you don't talk about ABC because that's not appropriate workplace conversation. Now that I'm not saying that we're crossing like any professional barriers, but I think it's becoming more of an inclusive space where it's okay to talk about when you're not okay, and employers and organizations are providing the resources or normalizing the fact that people are using these resources to really get the help that people need. And I think that's really added a lot of value that to have to see your leader care about you as a person, not care about you as the person who produces the widgets or getting this report out every single week too. So it's definitely a culture shift that, as you know, takes a lot of time, but we are starting to see that little by little, but there's always room for improvement in that area too.
Yeah, it makes me think of all of the memes and the videos you see out there about millennial managers, right? It's 10 o'clock at night and they're like, why are you calling me? Like, have work-life balance. And yet we're sitting there doing our emails. And, it's funny because we're told over and over, practice what we preach. And
Hmm.
I think it's become very hard for our generation, having kind of been on the kick up end of, yeah, you have a phone, you're around, you're reachable, it was a level of comfort at one point that you always had someone you could call on. And now we're telling people don't call us. Don't, please don't. I don't,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't handle it.
I think that also stems from more of like the grad school mentality or a college mentality where it's like it was like a 24/7 job being a
Hmm.
student. Like you had after class, you had projects, you're always on. I remember transitioning from school to work, it was like after 5 o'clock, I'm like, now what? Like it was sort of weird, like not to have to do homework or go to a networking event and organize this event for whatever, or like after like club of the organizations that you're a part of. So it was like a weird transition. But now I think it's also like, especially becoming a parent, is setting your boundaries like, hey, like,
Hmm.
yes, I have to log off at 5. I know there's this big meeting that we need to get deliverables in before 8 a.m. on Monday. Like, I'm not available from 5 until 7. But if you really need me, I can log in after this particular time to finish up whatever presentation. And like, I don't, I think I've done a much better job at saying like it's not something that becomes a norm that I do on a regular basis, but in a pinch, like I still am able to flex that because I'm allowed a flexibility to do my kids drop offs in the morning and log on like 20 minutes later than I normally would, or something of that effect. So I don't, my boundaries are definitely stronger than they were before, but there's wiggle room because you understand, and it's because it's like I feel committed to my team members to help them produce whatever product that we are committed to producing, and that's just my personal work ethic. But I think like I want to be there for the little moments with the kids as well, whether it's making their dinners and having them not eat their vegetables and doing bath time, and it's but those are my priorities that I see in this point in my life too.
Yeah, and I think we talking about some of those things or even talking about where we struggle, right? So if you are a new mom and you're struggling to keep those things, you're just like, I feel like I have to answer everything, is, having an accountability partner. I always laugh that one of the first bosses I had at the VA said that he went to countries that he couldn't take his laptop to for vacation because he didn't want to work. So if he traveled, domestically, he would take his laptop and he would work. And I was like, that feels drastic. And then 2 years later, I was doing it. Or, was on a call today and the attorney called in from his family vacation. And I'm like, why are you doing that? you know? So there's an element of like even pushing back on each other or
Mhm.
being the coach, even if we don't know how it feels, like just going, no, no, you to ask for that or to do that. And I think it brings up the wonderful idea of checking in on people, right? So especially folks that have gone through this transition in life, they're starting a new phase. Maybe you do or don't understand it. Would have been some of the best ways or ways that you found comforting that people kind of checked in on you and the family, or you hadn't heard from them in a year. It's like, how do we do that better and be there to support people during their seasons that they may be
Mhm.
shifting through?
Yeah, and I think this is where some people feel uncomfortable in the workplaces. I know some people hold back on sharing like their personal life details, but I think when it comes to, especially in a team setting, I think it's essential to make yourself vulnerable in the workplace to a certain extent because I think that allows you to build stronger connections with people, sense of trust when it comes to when you're executing a certain project that you really rely on this person and know that they'll be there for you no matter what. As in for checking in, I think I personally just had a lot of people, even in this remote environment that I worked in for my last two jobs, that were just IMing me, like, hey, how are you doing? How's the baby? And I mean, for someone who has thousands of photos of my kids on my phone. Like most parents are more than excited to share. And so it could be simple as like, hey, like, do you have any new pictures to share of your kids? Just wanted to, even if you can't relate on their struggles, it's just like, just asking the question, like, how are you doing? Or like, what is new with you and your kids right now? Like, how can I support? I think it's also like as a mom, I also found like my mom friends or my parent friends in the workplace. We even started like a mom's coffee chat, virtual coffee chat at times where it was we were not talking about work. It was like, oh, my kids like when they went through this phase where they didn't want to eat their vegetables. This is what I did, or I'm having a hard time with them sleeping. It was just like being able to really find your village. I know everyone talks about a village, but finding your village that you can just be truly yourself in the workplace or even in your personal life really provides that outlet of making you feel like you're not alone. Like people are going through the same things that you have, or people have gone through the same things you had. I have coworkers who have grandchildren at this point and they're giving me parent advice when I'm telling them like, hey, I slept 2 hours last night. Like they would say like, I remember that so vividly, sleeping in a chair because my child did not want to go to sleep in her crib. And the reassurance that they provide is like, this will pass and you'll be okay, is like, okay, there is that light at the end of the tunnel from people who walked that path before you. I think it's like from both sides, and I'm now seeing the people who have reached out to me definitely encourages me to do the same service to people, to my other colleagues, whether they are going through welcoming a new family member, like welcoming a new baby, or taking care of an older family member and they have to take a step aside. It's just a simple like, how are you doing? Like it could even be a Teams chat that just like allows them to open up. And I think it's just being consistent with those check-ins because there are times where people just are not in the mindset to open up. But
Mhm.
there's sometimes those are the people who crave the most level of support.
Yeah, definitely an important reminder to realize that everyone's got a unique story, right? And if you don't hear from someone, not to assume why. I mean, I know I've had folks where, it's a year and a half goes by and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have not even it's not even crossed my mind to shoot a hello. There's, I think when we remove our guilt from those situations, they allow us to get more quickly to like the bonding moment, right? If it's just like,
Mhm.
yeah, oh my God, we haven't talked forever. Like, how are things versus let me apologize for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then by
Yeah.
then you've got to get on to your next, thing or your next moment. That human interaction that you've touched on a few times, can just be, I hate to say it, as honest and innocent as anything and still be really, really valuable.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I loved about you wanting to talk about this topic was the fact that I literally can't talk about this topic. I literally cannot talk about planning for a family, what it's like to have to take maternity leave, what it's like to navigate all of that. And I think we hinted at a little bit, but why is it so important for us to just, I hate to say, throw the whole parent versus non parent in the workforce like battle out the window and just understand each other a little bit more? You've been on both sides now. Like,
Mhm.
why should we care about each other from that mindset? Like, why should I want to make sure that parents are equally represented in the workforce? And why should parents want to make sure that their colleagues that don't have kids aren't, overly kind of encumbered with things just over this excuse?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to removing those stigmas of like what you do or how you prioritize your time at work. Like, if you are a great leader and a great contributor in the workforce, that's all that should really matter. And even if people who have different barriers or challenges or need different accommodations when it comes to scheduling because of kids, not kids, or whatever the stance, like people who truly are ambitious in the workforce will get the job done and will figure it out how to make it work. But if you're having teams or leaders that are not or are sidelining those folks who produce good work or are great leaders in the workforce, you're really missing out on a huge opportunity to continue to elevate and push forward your team's success and progress. And I think as a parent, like and this is like a big reason for why I want to continue working is because like you're proud of your career. You want to have a purpose outside of the home that makes you proud of your accomplishments, and to be sidelined because you have a quote unquote limitation makes you feel like what like it makes you look at like what is my self-worth anymore, and why don't people see my potential now that I'm a parent? And like I said before, like the parents are probably the ones who know how to do a lot more with a lot less because they are juggling out ways to get things done in a more efficient manner. Not to say that other non-parents aren't, but I think it's recognizing these skills that they gain outside of the workplace really apply to how they can operate in a work setting as well. As for the people who um, don't have children or don't have families, and why is that important to them in the workplace? It's like you're again like it all boils down to like this is a person who produces good work. Their ambitions have not changed. It's just how they have redirected their ambitions to achieve their overarching goals, whether it's both at work at home, and both need to be taken into consideration. And at the end of the day, people are people. They just want to feel appreciated, feel valued, and that shouldn't change based on your life outside of work and the different circumstances that everybody's in.
You mentioned a word, and I've never probably labeled this onto something, so I'm just going to repeat it because I think it's a great takeaway for things. Is this idea of the limitations, right? And so we make a lot of assumptions about people's limitations. Limitation on transport, limitation on reading comprehension, limitation on use of technology, and we tag those stigmas to maybe age groups or demographics, or in this case parents versus non-parents. And I mean, how many of those are our own internal things that maybe we're self-conscious about, or we think, well, we wouldn't be able to do it if we were in those shoes, or we had that snake. It's a great reminder that limitations aren't always actually limitations. They're just what we are considering as, but they only apply to maybe us. And, not to spread them so much more widely upon everyone else when they may not be really the
Mhm.
case.
Yeah, I think it's really looking past those different tags that you give people, whether they're part of XYZ generation, they live in this time zone, so they can't do X, that they those limitations. Once you look past that and you can see the person's ambitions, work ethic, and grit, that truly defines the type of colleague, partner, leader, employee that they can truly be. All those other things, if they have those core ambitions, grit, and motivations, they'll figure it out. They'll figure out a way to work around those limitations, or amplify those limitations to really get the job done. I think that's the like limitations shouldn't mask a person's ambitions.
Well, and it's a good encouragement, I think, even for those that have decision making in organizations, right? To think about ways that you can make yourself more accessible to any type of quote unquote limitation. So maybe it's someone that only works part time. Great. What do you have that's a specialized niche that could benefit from someone that's part time, or benefit from someone that doesn't have to be there, or a special skill set that's just an ad hoc, service that, hey, they sit out there on their own. It like makes me think of the people that fix vacuums, right? That you never need until your vacuum doesn't work, and then you're dying to find a vacuum person. So it's, I think we've tried over a lot of times to fit people into a corporate mold that
Mhm.
we could really put a puzzle together in a very different way and it still be magical and beautiful. So I've
Absolutely.
got two close ups for you. You've touched on one, so I just hope that maybe we can just kind of bundle it all together a little bit. But it's kind of like what your identity, you are still Sam. You are the same person that I sat down with and we were mashing our heads of how do we recruit more people into this organization that we're in. Still bringing all of that to the table. But what were the added benefits and things you learned that now you've brought with your motherhood
Mhm.
journey? So like now when Sam goes into that workforce and you're in that board meeting, what extra have you learned that you've brought to the table? That'll be question one.
Yeah, I think that the extra added component that I bring to the table is that like I'm more of a person than who you see in the workplace. Like I know early on in my career, like that was my identity. That was how I identify, like how I, like when you go to a Thanksgiving dinner, like that's what you talk about, like what makes, why are you successful and what makes you proud of what you do. I mean, working in healthcare, there's so much to be proud of. The work that you've done to impact so many lives and for different, so many different organizations. But now my expanded role is like, you know what? I have all these other accomplishments that I'm extremely proud of that I've done. Like I've raising my children, I've established a household, I have that level, and I think that really have has developed a deeper sense of empathy and more of those development of like leadership and soft skills that I think are so much more applicable to my work life now, that it's more, my identity has expanded more to than Sam who sits in the conference room leading XYZ meeting. Like there's so much more that I feel like I bring to the table as like these are my accomplishments. And I think over the past few years especially, it's like what are you the most proud of and what's your purpose in life? It's not just to produce a PowerPoint deck and impress this level of leadership to make a key decision. It's like my most proudest accomplishment is my children, and this is like I work to live, not live to work. Is that the right way you got it? I
Mm-hmm.
think so. And I think like those two little human beings are definitely like have been my most proudest accomplishment. I work because I want to show them like this is what I can achieve in my life, but I can also show them like this is all the things I've achieved as a parent as well.
Yeah, it's as you were talking and I was just like thinking about when we get asked for our bios, right? And we send our bio in. And for a long time, I think right out of grad school, it's always hard to come up with that last line that's supposed to be like not about who you are, like
Mhm.
where you graduated from, what your degrees are. Someone always throws in, oh, I volunteer. That's where you always see, married with 3 kids, or things like that. And it's a great, I think, task for folks to walk away from this conversation with and think about what are those 2 lines that go at the end of that bio? Because you're more than just that title and those things that you do on a day-to-day basis, and that really tells a story in and of itself.
Mhm.
But here's the last one for you. It's anytime I have some impact in things, I love to say kind of, what's your message for your kids about this? Like, what do you want them to know about, the future for them, or, what you hope to set up as the environment that they're going to be in when they end up in your shoes in 30 years?
Yeah. I mean, I could also be a little bit biased as like the internal tire mom of like, oh, go do this career, be a nurse, be a business executive, be a data scientist, and like those are the most successful careers on paper. But honestly, like what I hope my kids achieve in their like what they hope they do in the future is just be happy, be a good person, and follow what you're truly passionate about, and everything else will come into place. Like it's nice to have that roadmap that lays out what you're going to do in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. But there's going to be so many changes in the world, but that make you pivot. I know I've pivoted so many times in my career, and you have to learn how to be at your core. If you are kind and you're a good person and you keep on working towards your passions and beliefs, everything else will work out. And I hope that's the future that we see our children of just being good, kind people who are great additions to our society.
Awesome. Well, Sam, I have to ask if anyone here is like, that was a great conversation, and I'd like to have coffee virtually with Sam one day. How can they get a hold of you? How can they find you out there?
Yeah,
I think you've got a
you,
LinkedIn, maybe. Tell
Yeah,
us.
you can find me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message over there. I love talking to early careerists, mid-careerists, people with more experience than me, who always could provide some insight. It's sort of crazy now talking with you, Natalie, of like, oh, people want to talk to me to get my insight. Because I feel like I was always the one hustling out and say, give me your wisdom and advice. And it's hard to transition to think that role. It's like, oh, people really want to get my advice now, but
Hmm.
it's sort of wild to think about like just like in the short amount of time the experience it did that, and just really like reflecting back on that, how that really contributed to like overall career growth and personal development growth. That's it. Hopefully I can help or just be a listening ear to anybody else who's going through a similar journey.
Awesome. So if you are interested in talking to Sam, check the show notes. We'll make sure that the link to her LinkedIn is there. reach out. And again, it doesn't have to be on this topic. Anything kind of that has resonated with you today. Our emails, our DMs, all those things are always open, as with most of the guests that have come on here. And Sam, I just want to say thank you for coming on. This is it is a topic that I think sits in the background of so many of our minds. And maybe we just focus on the age piece, or we just focus on a midlife crisis component, but none of that stuff lives independently. And there is so much that influences how we show up and how we engage. And I think you've given us a lot to chew on. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up for everyone listening?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we can continue this conversation and go into so many depths of parenthood, mid-career positioning, and all these. I appreciate the platform and the opportunity to speak with you. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversations offline.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the discussion and taking the time. Thanks to the listeners for tuning in for another episode. Hopefully, you heard a little bit about how we took the hot mess of how some of us might be feeling right now, gave you a little strategic direction for how you can take that to high potential going forward. And thanks again for listening. We will talk soon.